Hello.
So, what are you going to slice today?
This episode,
Vertically and horizontally.
and preferably vertically. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Today's episode is about vertical slicing. Adrian, are you okay? I'm seeing some video stutters. Is that me? Is that you? I'm not sure. I'm just checking.
Looking like it's me. Hey?
Welcome to our live audience. We're basically doing a double track AI in development and continuous delivery series for the past 2-ish months. Today is one of those continuous delivery topics. Vertical slicing is those things that are super popular, almost impossible to Google without being overwhelmed with AI-generated consultancy saturated nonsense. And I find that vertical slicing is something that people struggle with. And I do end up having a lot of discussions about it in coaching practice. So I figured we will have like a simple primer. Like I've been doing this for so long now that I find it a lot easier now to discuss it in simple terms. And I figured that's something worth having a conversation about. If you have any questions, I see Silvio is with us, Brian. Hello on Substack. If you have any questions, I'm watching chat like a hawk, and we will respond to them. So if anything's confusing, or if it piques your curiosity, or if it gets the brain juices flowing and you have some questions, feel free to jump in. Yeah,
I will watch LinkedIn chat like an eagle, not a hawk.
Adrian, how do you slice? You have an upcoming deadline, or like you're like heavily in product development and release mode. How do you slice work?
Vertically. I just need to ask. So, yeah, slicing work. It's actually a good question. So, I think first of all, this is not my topic, no, my direct topic. So I really need to think about that a little bit because I don't do that in a way probably how I should do it. That's the first thing which comes to my mind.
But I imagine you are doing it in a way that is practical for your team, right? I mean, you are slicing tickets to some degree.
Yeah, of course. I'm just thinking about how to. So it is like we had in the past as we started, or what I mean started. So we started a lot of times, right? So it's for 15 years now, or basically 15 years. And back then it was like we had a bunch of things planned, and then we tried to bring it down into a lot of tickets, working with Gantt charts, those kind of things. Critical path, as I learned it actually in engineering school. And that never really worked out because it is, that's a too big of a plan. And then we basically got smaller and smaller, more agile, more iterations, even smaller. And I would say today, especially in the last 1.5 years, we basically probably the influence of LinkedIn, creating content, talking with other people, right, about that. So I even did that more, or we did that more, that we basically slice work into very, very small packages. So we actually have one big thing going on, and we are developing on that as a team until it's done. Everything else doesn't really work for us. So it works in a sense, but so you can basically the piece of cheese we have is not an entire feature set. It is basically a task for a day, maybe two, and then we slice it down. But it is more like, hey, what do we want to do today? Okay, we need to get what we want today done today. So we need to basically push it, continuous delivery, continuous deployment idea in the end of the day to get some feedback next day, right? But this is what we actually want to do. And then we slice it to who's doing what, but we don't really have a board. Every time we set up a board somewhere, it is a little bit like this board becomes faster legacy than any legacy system I have ever created. It is like, yeah, it's nice that people ask us, yeah, we have still tickets, and then no one wants to read those tickets because it's more like an idea board, right? And that doesn't work out. So, the point is, as soon as you start, so this is my personal experience right now, as soon as you start to gather a lot of feedback from outside, from teams, clients, customers, and then in that moment, you change plans very often. Right? And that is a tendency we have, especially as a smaller company. We do that very often. So because we need to, it's part of the way we earning money. And that makes every form of planning quite complicated. So we don't use the term slicing. That was the reason I was a little bit thinking about that for a moment, if we get it together. But yeah, that is actually what we do. Does it help? Need to rearrange the camera.
It definitely helps. I mean, it's from a perspective of the terminology. I don't think anybody uses the word slicing. I think only agile consultants use the word slicing. But I had to name the episode something. So, so that's an interesting approach, and I can definitely see your seasonal experience in how you're doing your work. Focusing on one thing, keeping Whipnum at low end. Working in a way that you're closing the entire path to production very quickly while you're gathering feedback. I think that's like checks a lot of the boxes on the how to do it correctly list. In my conversations, I usually have two types of people. Leaders who wing it, and they just have no plan and no board, and they end up working in way too large batches. Opposed to yourself, who's sort of winging it, but working in very small batches and staying very focused. Like that distinction is very, very, very important. And then there's I think, slightly larger group of leaders, engineering managers, engineering leaders, startup CTOs, who have a board, and they're focusing so much on making the board pretty, on putting as much information as possible into the board.
Assuming that everyone is studying the board all day long.
Exactly, and assuming that the board, assuming that the board or looking at the board will somehow make work go faster, and it never does. I often jokingly say, when it comes to they ask me, okay, if I want to put DORA metrics on the board or story points or maybe put components or epics alongside stories and tickets or tasks, I keep getting almost bombarded with questions regarding how to structure it, and I keep telling them your board is not supposed to be pretty. Your board is supposed to be empty. Right? If you have a board, that means that you have more than one thing in the pipeline, and there are more than one handoffs in between those steps. So if you can condense that, similar to a workflow that you're doing, then that's the best solution, right? You don't need a board because everybody has full situational awareness about what is actually being actively worked on. Or at the very least, you have a simple board where the goal of the board is to keep it as empty as possible, right? So having information on the board is a signal that there is somebody who is not on the team who needs to be in the know. about what the team is doing. This might be a handoff, an adjacent team, or a parallel team. But often it's just confused managers who are like very anxiously looking at the money and the budget and the cash flow, and they want to know when it's going to be released.
Yeah, it's like a wishful thinking. It's a little bit like I want that this happens like this. It's more like a basically a list of desired outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So with what until when, but then everyone else is basically accountable when it actually not happens. But the problem is, it is not like that we are a standardized factory line where you know exactly how much or how long does it take to create that brick or piece of item. So it is more like we developing a solution. So we don't even know if it will be like in the ticket. Most likely it's not, right? And so you can't really deadline a development. You can, but then it's actually deadline. So you don't work to create the best outcome. You work to create an outcome for the day. That's a different thing.
Yeah, in my experience, having work be negotiable is very important, right? So when you have a problem, what is very important in software especially is that the understanding regarding what the problem is that we're solving, that is non-negotiable. That we don't say, oh, today it is a problem and we are solving it. Tomorrow it's not a problem and we're not solving. So it's just that what should be negotiable is how the work is done, the scope of the work, the quality of the work, the timing of the work. Right? Like everything needs to be negotiable. And I find that people who do, the episode today is called vertical slicing. I find that teams that do horizontal slicing, in contrast, I think that's the default for a lot of people. When they do horizontal slicing, they make the entire software delivery process non-negotiable. And then that's where the real stress comes in, because it just saturates the pipeline without any feedback. And it forces the teams to speculate. And speculation is the root of all evil. Like I keep having workshops now. I started workshops last month, just free workshops that talk about
TDD
this
workshops?
aspect. No, engineering leadership workshops.
Oh, okay.
I phrase them no speculation leadership, engineering management, because I want to talk about this idea that, hey, your underlying ecosystem is uncertain. I don't want to engage into a type of engineering process that relies on speculation in order to be successful. Yeah, that this idea that in order for us to be successful, I need to know how it's written and that AI can help and what the estimate will be and who will be working on it when, and this is all speculation. And if there's engineering leaders out there, or for viewers who are watching us right now, if you think that the speculation in any way, shape, or form is helping you achieve your business outcomes sooner or more efficiently, that's very, very far away from reality. But a lot of people that I've talked to, that I coach, they don't know an alternative. Usually to them, and I might need to, screen share here for a little bit of a board. What am I screen sharing? There's just a tab. Excalibur, this one. All right. So when you speculate, there's generally three things you want to speculate. Either you don't know what is going on, how far along we are, or when it's going to be finished. Okay, that's usually what's going on. And when it comes to vertical slicing, I use the terminology vertical to denote slicing along layers, just in case there's confusion. Usually there's some aspect of UI, logic, and persistence, usually a database of some kind. For context, let's limit ourselves to like software for web APIs, for web businesses, web-based businesses, or internet-focused businesses, or businesses that use internet as the medium. So
the stuff most people in the audience are actually probably working on.
Yes, but this is not for hardware, not for Formula One racing. So like there are some...
Not for the JavaScript on your washing machine, right?
Not for JavaScript, AI-driven JavaScript on your washing machine. Very good. Very good. Yeah, not that one. But for everything else, yes. How how teams usually form is they have, hang on, let me put some labels on this. Let's say this is the typical example front end. Then there's logic, back end. And then there's persistence, state, backend, right? So this is your databases, etc. And usually you will have people who are specialists on one or two of these, right? And usually how I see people then break up work is they say, well, Steve will be working on this, and he's going to start first because we need that. And then Bob will be working on the back end. And when that is kind of finished, we'll start working on the front end. This is horizontal slicing. And I see a lot of engineering teams, beginners.
Now I get what you wanted to say to me. That's good. Draw it on the board.
Yeah. So a lot of teams slice it horizontally and even start them like this. You can see how they are shifted. Mm-hmm. Now the issue is, you said something very important already, in that there is speculation involved with it never goes as you plan. Right? So if you define the requirements and left to right, it's a timeline. Let's do this is a timeline, left to right. I hope that's not out of screen, is it?
No, it's all good. Okay, you can read everything, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So if that's the timeline, then the requirements were defined here, right? And you created the plan there, at this point, at the pink line. That's where you created the plan. The problem is, normally, in software, the requirements change somewhere about here.
So late.
And now, well, I don't have a scale here. That might be hours, days, weeks, right? So, but the point is that if you don't have a stable delivery process, then in order for the thing at the bottom here that was started at the very beginning of time, you sort of have to synchronize it all the way up here to the end in order to get feedback on whether that was worth building. So the green box, the green dotted box. The issue is that when the requirements change, you now have this like split brain logic of, well, yeah, but the thing that was done or partially done before the requirements changed are implemented based on the old requirements. The things that we started just as they were about to change are now planning along the new requirements. And the front end is assuming that it's too early still, but now we have the old version of the database, the newer version of the backend, and you get this like split brain situation, as if you have like some kind of gradient across the entire organizations, where the front end people are always slightly a little bit behind the backend people. The backend people are slightly a little bit ahead of the database teams. Then there's the operational team and what we would call SRE or DevOps, and there's always this like time gradient between them. That's what happens when you slice work horizontally and you plan it like this, and then somebody has to walk around the room, walk around the organization, and pull these timelines together. And that is purely speculative right now.
And it creates more work, because normally the deadline, which is supposed to somewhere there at the end, right, is still there, but this overhead of translating from the old requirements to the new requirements is actually extra effort, which is stacking up if you have that daily, right? Exactly.
And there's a lot of reporting going on in such teams where you say, I'm working on X while I'm waiting for the backend person to finish so that I can start working on that once it's done, so I don't have to do it twice. And that comes in good faith, right? So here, the dev team is not idle. Here, blue. Here, the dev team is not idle. They're working on something else, thinking that if they start sooner, they will have to do it twice because maybe something will be changed, right? So whenever there's a change in the requirements, you go layer by layer again. So there you encounter this delay once more. And this happens a lot where teams are put together based on like specialization. but they're not really working as a team because the horizontal slicing forced them to individuate too much. So they don't really own the whole delivery process as a team until everything is sort of kind of stopped and put together and rolled out, which happens here, right? So it encourages the output of such a slicing strategy for work, for tickets, for stories, is that inherently your batch size cannot be small. Like, it is nearly impossible for this kind of team to work in small batches. You can create fake batches by just slicing it up this way, each layer. But that causes the same kind of synchronization problem of, well, yeah, I have batch 5 for the front end, but for continuity's sake, it still needs to follow in the right direction with the other layers. So that doesn't really help. It just creates more work in slicing it up. So what vertical slicing is? Can
you put it below that so they have a comparison?
Sure. So what vertical slicing is? I do need to make a copy of this though.
That's what I mean.
So requirements get defined here. Requirements change the first time here. Who's talking to me on Slack? Somebody's talking to me on Slack.
It's not me.
Okay. Nothing urgent. Okay. I mean, it might be important, but nothing stream related.
Kitchen is burning.
Kitchen is burning. I wouldn't. That wouldn't be on Slack. Right. So, what vertical slicing is, the layers still exist, but we as a team constrain ourselves to what kind of batch can we create, like what kind of increment can we create that fits into a timeline where we can guarantee that all of us are moving forward at the same pace before the requirements change. And before the requirements change can be anything. It can be before product loses appetite, before the workday finishes is a very good target. I think you're doing something similar. It's like, what can we across all layers do to finish something by the end of the day? And it creates a completely different mentality regarding how you slice up work. Now, what I see in a lot of teams is they say, well, slicing up the tickets is not my responsibility, so I will do them how they're sliced up. I got a ticket to do the back end, somebody else got a ticket to do the front end. What am I supposed to do? And usually when you're encountering tickets like this, it's completely okay for you to slice it up internally within the team and then say, yeah, all 3 of them are finished when we did 4 slices, because now it's scope complete to what the ticket said. You don't actually have to break up the tickets to create this parallel, because it's just going to create more bureaucracy. Again, it'll make the board pretty, but you want the board to be empty, not pretty. So just do whatever you need for, like in Jira, do whatever you need that works for your team to communicate what is important, and then work in vertical slices. Now, what does this look like? This means that when we're slicing work, I'll give it a little bit more of a stronger color. When you're slicing work vertically, this means that we need to include something from each layer for each increment. Now, ideally, it's the front-end person doing the front-end work, the back-end person doing the back-end work, and the DB person doing the DB work. Or maybe the back-end person is doing both, or you have a full-stack engineer, but you need 2 of them because there's some special logic going on. What is most important is to focus on let's say, the WIP limit, the time limit of, hey, I just want to roll out something. Like, I don't want to develop the backend faster than I'm developing the front end. It's about pacing. It's not so much about feature completeness. So let's say you have a very simple backend and an extremely complex front end. So the work naturally will be more front end focused. But the point is that what you don't want to be doing is moving the horizontal bits forward that in itself are not releasable to the end customer, right? So what we're focusing on is, say, I want something that makes sense to show to the user, even if I'm rolling out a simpler UI. Now, when it comes to slicing, there are multiple strategies to slicing. One vertical slicing strategy might be alongside TDD. If you're doing TDD, the zombies strategy, the ZOM, right? So the 0, 1, many. You also hardware companies usually do the 0, 1, infinity, right? It's like, let's create a version of the UI that has no choice. Right? That would be 0. Or let's create a version of the UI where the user has one choice, or maybe they have one state, like a successful state, and the 0 was the unsuccessful state, right? When, for example, there's no login, and the one state might be anonymous user versus not logged in, right? And then the infinity state could be, yeah, you can log in, and we can, in theory, have an infinite amount of users, right? But the important aspect here is that you find a lever within each vertical that is negotiable. That's the really impactful knob that you can turn for your work. That means that if the backend is extremely complex and the UI is simple, you try to figure out, well, if the UI is simple, for example, if it's ChatGPT, then I can implement it very quickly because it's just a text box, and then what it really boils down to is any kind of weird embedded prompts that I can do with a ChatGPT, if you're building an AI bot, for example. On the backend side, it's actually much more complex because you're trying to figure out, okay, can I do some cost savings? How do I communicate? Is it going to be streamed, etc.? And the really important aspect here is that simple or 0 for this kind of UI could be that you can't prompt, right? That you just have a few buttons and you say, yeah, pick one of the prompts that we've prepared. Here's a proof of concept, and it does like everything, back end to front end, persistence to front end. That would be like a 0 state, because what we're focusing on when we're vertically slicing is we don't necessarily need to deploy each slice to the user. What we want to the end user, what we want is to say that once we finish work, instead of tomorrow having a status meeting that this person wants to have to figure out where we are on each track, we can show them the slice that is in itself reasonable.
Yeah, and there's a psychological effect in that as well. So in the upper example, the person from outside on the right-hand side, your arrow there, probably CEO, PO, whoever, right, from the outside, they are basically satisfied at the end of the ticket. Everything in between is a black box for them. They don't understand that. It is a little bit like, are they lying to me? Are they competent enough? All those kind of things. And in the bottom example, it's a different thing. You deliver every day something which is done and reportable, which is a different thing. This is delivered at least to some form of internal staging system where this person can take a look. Oh, they made progress. I understand. Okay, next thing. This is what you understand as a human, normal being without being a tech person. So that is one of the most, or let's say, this is the aspect I like most because I'm in between both worlds. This is not, so there are a lot of good aspects about this agile, incremental, or iterative approach, but the very best one is that you actually take the stress out of the entire development cycle. That's the best thing.
It also psychologically forces you to think about full path of production across the entire team constantly. Right. So in this example, it might be extremely tempting for the backend dev who's doing the database and the backend API to reason under the assumption that where they might say, okay, I'm done, but I'm not going to deploy to production because the front end is not. And it can tempt them into a kind of thinking of, okay, once I am waiting and I don't know when the front end person will finish, I will kill some time. I will work on something else. And it encourages the team to split up. And when the team does this kind of split, then Now there's more pressure on the manager to create unimportant tertiary work to keep everybody busy. Because the teams themselves, by virtue of how they're slicing up the work, they will gravitate towards handoffs. And when you're having handoffs, you have this mentality of, oh, nobody owns full path to production, so we just need to finish each slice, each horizontal bit, each layer of the cake. And then when it's done, we have a meeting and we roll it out. And that is what inherently drives everybody crazy, because then the time between the meetings is so long that by the time you have this meeting to orchestrate the rollout, the deploy, even if it's once a week, by that time the requirements will have changed. The front-end person might be working at a completely different pace than the backend team. There might be work happening already. There might be rework happening in the backend stuff that the front-end team needs to know about. Or it can. I picked DB backend and frontend, but you can also think about it as the database we're not touching. There's a backend server, and there's like Android and iPhone. Like it can like split either way. Like, but the very important aspect of this charade, really, on the top side, on the horizontal side, is that if you're moving out of sync, it'll always create pressure for the team to split up. And when the team splits up, somebody needs to manage it's scatter gather. And when the team scatters, somebody needs to step in and manage the gather phase, which means that there is always somebody interrupting. Something needs to be interrupted for the gather phase to happen, which creates a lot of tension, which creates a lot of, no, I'm in focus mode. Yes, but you're in focus mode on the wrong thing. It's time to gather. Like, we scattered and now we gather. You're working on this because it's not the top priority, but you can't help with the current layer, the current phase that it's at, because it's not your specialty.
Yeah.
And it creates this sort of hyper-specialized, individuated environment where there's really no social responsibility for rolling out an increment or for rolling out an iteration.
In my experience, it is possible to split up a little bit, but there is a certain threshold. If you pass that one, chaos will arise. That's the problem. So, if you, it's a little bit like that. So you have a very heavy front-end topic, for example, and the back-end team is just delivering an hour of work, and the front-end team needs to put in something like 7 hours. Then, of course, what are you going to do with the 6 hours of the back-end team? So it might make sense to already talk about the next slice. Can we prepare something for that, or can we help testing or something like that?
But if that's the case, we're already talking about two teams. In this situation, in this situation that you just mentioned, the backend team would already be serving different interests than that team that is working on the front end. Right? So the backend team only facilitated. There were this typically happens when there's a mature platform engineering environment where you say, oh, this one this bit.
Yeah, but this is what I wanted to say with help testing. That's the idea of a little bit of a DevOps team, not the ops team thing, but the integrated team. So if there are more specialized persons can work on the front end, there is some person who's already preparing the deployment, or maybe you need to make changes for the migration that you put in work there, or you already test what the colleagues. So do something which supports this task. And if there's definitely nothing more to do, you can, of course, prepare ideas for the next one. But I wouldn't recommend to already implement everything of those other things, because then you end up with what you say, because there is most of the time the tendency that one part is faster developed than the other part. So which means that this part will always be faster than the other. And that is not very good. So that's a little bit
So one of the strategies is this 0-1 many. Another strategy is figuring out how you want it released, right? So it might be working with variations, right? Variations usually happen when there's one of the layers is constrained. For example, you might see ChatGPT is a good example, right? So the UI layer is very constrained, and the variations are coming from the data. This also happens when there's variations in processing. For example, a order processing system or a checkout system will sort of have the same UI, but the variations are coming from how you're doing tax calculations. But everybody sort of has VAT. Even if VAT is being masqueraded as GST, or other taxes or sales tax, it is still conceptually the same number of moving parts, but there are variations in semantics. But it's not like an insurance form where, depending on one decision, you get forced down a completely different workflow. So when you're experiencing variations, one of the best strategies for splitting up work vertically is to say, we're going to do full path to production on one variation, and then we're going to do full path to production on the second variation. And then we'll decide how to merge them together, right? So you literally maybe even create a full copy of the system where you say, well, I'm releasing a copy of the system that does this variation. And then rather than adding a choice of variation, I'm just going to create a copy of the system that does only the second variation. And then only when you have two, when you add the third one, then you add choice. Landing pages usually do this. Like landing pages or marketing especially is a very good example of doing vertical slicing very well, when they say, well, I have some few options, and you have this option and the middle option and the right option, usually tiered by expense or by subscription duration, etc., or by tier when it has an enterprise integration. But generally, you could build it as there's one landing page for one of the options, there's one landing page for the other options, and then there's a third landing page that has both options as a choice. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about variations. What you're negotiating on is you and the team and the managers and the business people can negotiate on how and in what size of increment it goes out, rather than just the first iteration being there's three choices and the choices are on screen and all of them work equally well, right? Because then you basically have no progress, no progress, no progress, no progress, and then you get a lot of stuff at once. And then if there's anything wrong, you don't really know where to attribute the issues, right? So you're trying to figure out this idea of, when we're here in the timeline, when we're on the timeline where you're prior to the requirements changing, and you can think of it as the requirements will constantly change, sometimes more frequently, sometimes less frequently, right? So the requirements will constantly change. There will be a constant change in requirements. The pink line is when the requirements change. What you're really racing towards is, how easily can the entire team do full path to production on an increment before we learn something new, or before the business changes its mind about what we really want. And this idea of what we really want, it might be anything. It might be that seeing the increment, the previous one, actually legitimately showed us that, actually we don't like where this is headed. Let's do something else. So there is a constant sort of pressure that comes with time and more information to willingly deviate from the plan. And that's what really vertical slicing leans into. It says, vertical slicing is approaching the problem space as, you will change your mind, so let's keep the entire team synchronized between two events of changing your mind on anything in the product. The design might change, or there's a budget for each layer, and the further we go right on the timeline, the less budget we have left for the last layer, right? Usually if you're doing backend to front end, then what usually happens is that you run out of time to do front end changes or to pimp the design, or you're so focused on the front end that you then run out of time to do backend changes. So usually whoever is at the end of the cycle, or imagine I add another layer which is just testing. If it's at the end of the cycle, then you will do basically no testing, because whatever feedback is derived from testing or QA in that sense, you won't have time to act on it, right? Because you will have changed your mind by then about what it is you really want from QA. Because QA might tell you, what, it was a bad idea to build this, let's start from scratch. And by that time, you won't have the appetite to do so.
And it's another aspect now from the business side. when you do vertical slicing, like what we see on the screen, you tend to make decisions in smaller iterations and in smaller frequency or shorter frequency. So which means that it is the chance is higher to get to a outcome you actually want to have, even though you don't know it because it's still potential. And the bad thing with the upper approach, where we have this black box timeline, 3 to 3 weeks, something like that for a feature. The problem is the more you get to the end, the less likely is that the people really want to implement changes because of sunken cost fallacy. We've gone all the way already. I don't know. And then you start to create stuff no one needs because you actually you weren't taking the right exits of the autobahn, right? When you're right. Because you didn't exactly know where to go, and you were just driving to a destination where you thought you need to go. But it turned out that it would have been better to, take the exit, let's say, 2 times earlier. And that is what's missing here. No.
How I'm usually explaining it is to especially the business owners or to leaders who are interfacing primarily with translating engineering to product and business, is that what the business sees is what the user sees, generally. In most cases, there must be some user-facing component here, or at least some administration-facing component, right? Which is a different user. So what the business sees is movement along. What the business sees is movement along this axis, right? Along this one, the top layer, the most user-facing layer. You can think of distance to user increasing the further down the stack you go.
Yeah.
And what the business sees is essentially how often the CEO, for example, can make decisions in their business, right? So if there's a lot of subcatenous work, subcatenous is what would be below the layer of front end or below the layer of anything that might substitute for a release or a releasable version. Usually you want to release the backend to the customer, right? So if they can only operate on the business essentially here, then in their head, they can't fulfill their CEO duties, in that part of the time where there's no visible progress.
Yeah. There's nothing done for them.
And if that only happens on like a scatter-gather meeting, then if the work is slow and is dominated by the size of the batch, and the CEO only gets to be the CEO on the scatter-gather meeting, then if you're having those meetings once a week or every 2 weeks, then the CEO only gets to be the CEO for 1 hour every 100 business hours. And I'm not even counting man hours here, right? Like that's the core issue. That's what stresses them out. And then that stress, that sort of uncertainty requires you to make up for that lack of certainty. And then they ask you for estimates and where are we and how's it going? And are we sure? And and what if you're wrong?
Yeah, it's a big problem.
And that's speculation. That anxiety then broods all kinds of negative emotion into the process.
Yeah.
But the solution, it's too late.
Especially when you have when you have something like an API first approach, a feature of 3 weeks of time, and you need 2.5 weeks to actually get to the point where you build a front end. You can imagine that stakeholders outside, or non-tech stakeholders, when they are in a room alone, they basically telling that, hey, our engineers are basically incompetent like anything else because they don't deliver anything in that time, and we don't trust them because they were late last time as well, so I assume they will be late again because you see they don't deliver anything, and that is a big problem. So not only is that the better approach, it's a big problem with trust to basically do the upper one. Absolutely. And the worst thing is that most people are actually doing the upper one because the upper one is closer to what we know from traditional project planning.
Yeah, and manufacturing and other kinds of processes. For example, a very good vertically sliced, vertically integrated system would be restaurants, right? So when you're ordering a steak, the waitress the waiter knows to ask how you want it, and they only ask you if you're ordering steak. Like if you're ordering chicken, they won't ask you if you want it rare or medium, right?
Do you want a rare fish?
Right. So they need to know. They need to be vertically integrated with the menu. Or for example, if you order something that is not available a la carte, if it's not available, you don't want to have an experience where the person in front of the customer has no idea what the backend can serve, right? And it forces everybody to work in lockstep. It's like, okay, chef is overloaded. Well, the waiter has to say, has to set expectations. If the chef has no orders, well, we might, need to prep up the owner to come in and do some marketing, maybe do an Instagram post to bring in some more traffic for the afternoon shift, right? So all of these little things can definitely, or nowadays, with Volt and Uber Eats and equivalent products, it might be, hey, we're swamped, maybe turn off Uber Eats for like an hour, right? So this entire system has its benefits from being vertically integrated, because essentially every item coming in and being cooked and going out requires 7 different people, and it has to come in lockstep. It doesn't help you that you're cooking food in advance if you don't know what people will order and you have a giant menu, because then you'll just be throwing it out. Plus, if you serve it from the inventory, you might go out cold. So you might get people sending food back because you were trying to optimize only one layer. Or same thing happen if the waiter is just very efficiently waiting 40 tables, but the cook can only serve one table every 15 minutes. Then you also want to work at the whip limit of the kitchen, so you tell people, hey, just to let you know, there's at least a 2-hour wait time. If that's, you can stay for drinks, but I cannot serve you any food if it's like earlier than an hour and a half. Like that's kind of the idea. And this needs to happen as soon as possible in the development team. Like in my experience, if you're in the top, if you're horizontally slicing, you do experience at least something along the pillar of toxicity or a psychologically unsafe environment, because it is a ticking time bomb. There are so many different buttons that you can trigger, that you can press. If there is any kind of synchronization issue or scatter-gather behavior, that there is unlikely that everybody would be so mature that they could work beyond those restrictions, that they could sort of just personally, from personal experience, overcome any of the stress points that the top way of working causes. Adrian, I saw your message that you have to go. Maybe we should wrap up here. So I understand that it's a little bit abstract, this vertical slicing idea. The best way that I can describe it is that what we want to be focusing on is to go in with the mentality. We need to decide what kind of development team will be. First of all, what kind of developer will be, and what kind of team will be. So my assumption is always, if I can't build the entire stack alone, so if I alone, Dennis, if I am not skill complete to finish with a feature, then I will always work in lockstep with the person whose work I understand the least. And that mentality helps a lot with vertical slicing, because you can then go to that person and then ask, hey, I know what I need to do. What do you need to do? And to then negotiate how the rollout happens. It's like, what can you do today? And what can I do today? And how does us working together look like? Like if we work alongside, am I bothering you? Are you bothering me? Because then maybe you need to do half of what you usually do, and I need to do half of what I usually do, and we put it together so that to show to everybody that you and I can work together and actually create an increment in one day. Because the upper way of working has this temptation of, oh no, let's do it horizontally because there's no rework, because we never have to do something twice, and that is exactly what you don't want, because the business is naturally coming from a place of, like if the requirements change, whatever you did prior to the requirements changing, without somebody seeing what you implemented, it will probably be reworked, but you will resist reworking it. And it creates this constant pressure to, no, but I already have it done. I already have it this way. Let's not change it. It's already on the path of production, but it didn't finish. I would always say, if requirements change significantly, just abort all unreleased work and take that as a lesson. Like take it on the chin and abort it. Don't assume that it's going to be finished, and ask yourself, oh, we did that because we thought it was simple and quicker, but it wasn't. What does that tell about our understanding of the problem? Maybe we should be working in smaller slices. And then gradually, when you make them smaller, they will overlap sooner. And then you can say, okay, what does one overlap? Even when we're working horizontally, what does one overlap look like? And can we plan work for tomorrow in such a manner? This is hard, by the way. I'm coaching teams. This usually takes like 3 to 4 months just for this like slow mindset shift of, I'm not going to do work unless I understand what the other parts of the team need to be doing.
It's the same with TDD, right? You don't code before you haven't understood the actual problem.
Sort of. Yeah. But it's not really not coding until I've done the tests or spoken to a subject matter expert. It's more about this, if I have full understanding of the problem, then the solution is simple.
Yeah.
If the solution is simple, I can definitely finish something today.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say is what you shouldn't do is not understanding a problem, then starting to work to find out what the actual problem is, to understand it better. Of course, we do that in the longer scale, we do that. But when it comes to a single task, you should understand the task.
Yes.
You shouldn't implement too many hypotheses into one single task. Yeah.
You raise a very good point, is that if you don't understand what you're doing, so what I said is that when I understand everything, then the delivery will be, then I'm essentially skill complete and I can deliver a UI-facing, user-facing increment. If I'm wrong about that, and I need 2 days or 3 days or 4 days for a simple thing, then I was wrong about how complex the work is, which means I probably need help. And probably need help organizing it, splitting the work, and creating a vertical slice does make sense in that context. Which means that whenever you find yourself speculating of, well, I don't understand the problem, but I'll figure it out as I go, I would encourage you, you're probably up here. If you're in that mentality, this is a very good litmus test. If you're in that area of, well, I kind of don't know, but I will figure it out as I'm implementing it because it'll calm me down, I would always encourage you never to do that alone. Always include the entire vertical, always include the entire team. Because the time you're spending exploring to understand the solution, somebody is waiting. And in their waiting, they are probably working on something completely unimportant and unrelated. And that just implicitly creates this scatter-gather mentality that makes vertical slicing impossible, essentially, right? Because the person whose review you'll be needing will be busy with something completely unrelated that you don't know about. So even if it's just about the kind of work where you say, well, I am skill complete, but we said I'm not allowed to review my own work, you should at least know what your reviewer is working on so that you can bring them in as soon as possible, ideally in parallel while you're working on it. So at the very least, you can pair program with your reviewer half time while you're building it, even if you can build it alone. Most companies have like a second pair of eyes policy somewhere along the path to production. So even if you think that, oh no, it's simple, I can do it alone, it's probably just a few hours of work, I would already be including the person who's either going to be doing the handoff, testing, review. Maybe your mentor needs to do a second pass on it. Maybe you have a gatekeeper who is doing deployment to production or full canary release. That's definitely something to watch out for.
What I would like to add as well, or maybe as last thing for today, is when you talk with your team, you should have a like any form of check that your team understood. Everyone understood the actual task in its entirety. Yeah. So even if you implement a heavy logic on the front end part, right, and you have a little bit on the back end, and you have specialized persons, you still need to make sure everyone is understanding the same matter. in that moment. That you can actually, get everyone to align and support this matter, this actual goal. And that is very important and oftentimes missed. It's a little bit like, oh, this is your concern, this is your concern. This is then when you have two teams, right? And you're not working on the same thing. But that's what I mean by understanding. And if you have that, you already have this idea of what I actually going to implement, because I know that from the very beginning in my junior years, where you, instead of thinking about a problem, you were starting typing code. It's a little bit like the PHP area was like that. Typical PHP developer was scratching an idea in code. That's a little bit like, yeah, those ideas often stick in a production thing, and that is not so great. And that is what I don't like. So you should know at least the very basics, and as you said, have the seniors, the cornerstones, the most experienced persons, and the newer junior-like persons who might have different perspectives. Get those things together to find the best one. Have a good culture for that. That is important. That will make it better, because I saw that in the past as well, that some junior developers actually gave us very interesting insights about things going on the market, new technologies, things we can solve differently than we have done in our tunnel vision for 10 years now. And that was very interesting to see as well. So include everyone, not just the single alpha person who is there for a decade now. That is not really the way to go. So focus on the average developer is always the best approach.
Plus, definitely be very sensitive to somebody on the team not being involved in full path to production. So if the front-end person, for example, maybe it's the most senior person on the backend who's doing deployments, right? So maybe they're building the API first, they're releasing the API, but there's no consumer for it yet. And then the front-end person adds the front end, and then the backend person pairs with the front-end person to sort of wire it up, and then they review it together, and then they do a release. There's two things that go wrong with this approach. First, you should do a demand side first, which means UI before the API, so that you can verify whether everything that you plan to do, whether it makes sense once you see it. Like, the visual representation of progress is more powerful and profound than just building an API to spec. That there's
this
no
is not what
way...
we want to have, right?
Yeah, like there's no way of like removing the human from the process. Like once you see it, you will definitely see a few things that are wrong with it that you didn't see from the spec, that you didn't see
which you didn't
design.
need to implement in the backend.
Exactly. And then once you do that, you're definitely saving a lot of time. Just doing what I like to do is just, if I'm a backend person and I have screenshots for what the front end will look like, I create a version of the front end that has the screenshot taped on like a component. And I will just create some hotspots for clicking it. So at the very least, if the front-end person gets hit by a bus, at least I have an increment that I won't show publicly in production, but at least I can show it to somebody internally who will understand the trade-off that I have made. Right? So I will be able to show it to somebody who will be prepared to negotiate with me on the scope, right? And that's the really important factor. And the second reason that doesn't work is that this full path of production, if you don't see full path of production, you're not really excited about the release, which means that it's, again, this handoff culture, and there's usually a person with power and the person who's powerless. Usually it's your seniors and your juniors. But it can also be...
There's no ownership.
And there's no ownership. Yeah, if you don't see it rolling out, the incentive for them to start working on a different ticket as soon as possible before this one goes out to production is so strong that they will never really own. If you have that mentality of, oh yeah, I just finished my part and I started working on something else, like when review happens and that ceremony, it will go out to production. When a bug comes in, nobody takes it seriously. That's because they were not involved with full path of production, right? If you want that ownership of, oh, I want to release it because I want it to be demoed on our weekly demos to customers on the sales meetings, I care about that. So if the bug comes in, of course I will fix it. But that like emotional connection will not be there if the full path to production was interrupted, if it required ceremony, if it required orchestration, a meeting, a meeting is a definite killer for like excitement. It's like, I'm done, but we need to have a meeting about how we're gonna QA it. It's like, no, just shoot me. Like, I'm gonna QA it. I'm gonna figure out how to QA it so that we don't need to have a meeting about it.
Yeah, that's
anyway
actually a good topic. It's a good topic today.
Yeah, more on this later. I'm being very quick about it because this is a very complex topic, and it's impossible to talk about it if we're doing everything at the same time. So this is one of the precursors about the pragmatic aspects for continuous delivery. I have not seen a team go from feature branches and slow rollout to continuous delivery without in some way touching this problem. Now, they might not call it vertical slicing. I call it vertical slicing in order to sort of express this behavior. If you're interested in vertical slicing literature, vertical slicing was predominantly used by extreme programmers, and I think the first time it was sort of adopted in mainstream media was by Bill Ward. So Bill Ward started talking about INVEST, if you know the INVEST acronym for how to write user stories, about vertical slicing. So Bill Ward is one of the sort of early adopters of extreme programming, along with Kent Beck and others. So there's definitely this aspect of, if you want literature, definitely look in Bill's direction to learn more about vertical slicing and how to.
Not the drummer of Black Sabbath.
Not the drummer of Black Sabbath. Good. I'm glad there's.
Happy
okay.
to help.
I will do the outro. Adrian, you have to go. You have released the
What do we have next week?
Well, you asked me if today was a filler episode. I think next week is a filler episode.
Actually, it's not a filler episode. It's like we're basically talking about stuff going on. No, it's code review. Code review with AI.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned that regarding CodeScene rolling out a AI tool that has GPT-assisted code reviews. And you mentioned something about reviewing code with AI. I think with Juni or with Claude. I'm not sure.
It's about written code by AI. You need to QA with AI and review with AI, so that the AI
that's what we're going to talk
client
about.
Then can review as well. So no human involved anymore. No, it's a little bit like that. That's actually an interesting topic. Can AI assist us there? Let's looking forward to that one. Will be interesting.
Okay, so I'm going to do the outro. Adrian, thank you so much.
And great presentation. See you next time. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. For everybody who's still with us, thank you for joining. If you have any questions, I will be watching the event thread on LinkedIn. You can DM me on LinkedIn and Substack if you want to ask a question. And I will be hosting another No Speculation Engineering Leadership Workshop. It's going to be a free workshop in the afternoon hours on the last Monday in May, which I think, just looking at it very quickly, is the 26th. So usually 26th, 4 p.m., 5 p.m. Central European time, Berlin time. I'll be discussing these things in a very, very short format about basically what drives business owners crazy when you're working either horizontally or proxy horizontally. Proxy horizontally meaning that you put together a process that in good faith kept everybody busy, or at least everybody sort of working on important stuff. But ultimately, the teams became horizontally aligned and not vertically. And then that kind of behavior exposes plenty of stress factors for leaders. So the CEO who can't make decisions, the CTO who feels powerless or doesn't have oversight, the teams who feel that they're constantly being pressured by nonsense corporate engineering management stuff. God forbid that you show a Gantt chart or burn down chart in one of these meetings, because the devs will feel like you're interrupting them because they're this scatter-gather mentality. And there's a simple litmus test. You can just check, hey, do you ever in conversation in your stand-ups hear that, okay, the backend is done, now we're ready for the front end, or, oh, no, I can't start the front end, the backend is not ready yet. If that is going on, like if you can overhear those kinds of statements, those kind of conversations, you're definitely in a horizontally sliced team culture, which means that there is a constant pressure for the team to split up. There's a constant pressure for the team to be very defensive and sort of manage their uncertainties and people asking for estimates and how far along are we? Do you think I can maybe join tomorrow? Will you be done by tomorrow so I can start my part? And that creates a lot of negative emotion in the team atmosphere. The solution to that is not actually making those processes more efficient, but to prevent this situation from happening entirely by vertically slicing the work so that the team works together as soon as possible. Or, in lean terms, so that you figure out which part of the process is the scariest, and then everybody aligned to the scariest, slowest part of the process. Which also means that front-end engineers need to spend a lot of time with back-end stuff, and back-end engineers need to spend a lot of time with mobile development. But then that's a trade-off if you want to keep the team healthy. Yeah, happy to hear your questions. Thank you so much for being with us today. And see you next week on Code Review with AI. Ciao.